is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
There's only three people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. GB News understands tomorrow Tory MPs will give their verdict on whether the Rwanda bill is workable. Conservative MP Sir Bill Cash will present the findings ahead of the crunch second vote on Tuesday. The Prime Minister has come under pressure after it was discovered he paid £240 million towards a Rwanda plan without a single flight taking off. Tory sources say the MPs will decide whether to support the legislation tomorrow or, if necessary, hold a second meeting ahead of the vote. Met Police say 2 teenage girls have been arrested on suspicion of robbery after a woman was attacked in London. A warning, this video shows distressing images. Footage of the attack has been circulating on social media, showing the 20-year-old walking in Stamford Hill and then being robbed and beaten. The woman, who is from the Orthodox Jewish community, was reportedly left bruised but did not need to go to hospital. Met Police say it's keeping an open mind about the motive for the attack, but are treating it as a possible hate crime. Baroness Michelle Mone says she made an error in publicly denying her links to the PPE firm MedPro. It was awarded government contracts worth more than £200 million to supply personal protective equipment after she recommended it to ministers. The National Crime Agency is investigating the firm and its connection to the Conservative peer. Lady Mone argues she is being used as a scapegoat by the government for its own COVID failings. A judge has ordered the BBC to release emails related to Martin Bashir's controversial 1995 interview with Princess Diana. A warning, the following video has some flashing images. Mr Bashir officially stepped down from his job at the broadcaster in 2021 after it emerged he had secured the interview through deception and faking documents. Judge Brian Kennedy said the corporation had been inconsistent and unreliable in the way it dealt with the initial inquest to release material under the Freedom of Information Act. The material related to how the broadcaster handled the scandal when it came to light in 2020. Fresh weather warnings have been issued as Storm Fergus sweeps across the country. Leitrim village in Ireland has been hit by a possible tornado as homes and cars are seriously damaged. Emergency services were called after high winds from Storm Metarine flattened trees, ripped a roof off a building and left debris scattered on the street. Yellow weather warnings are in place and over 40 flood warnings have been issued across England and Scotland. Gale force winds are likely to hit South Wales and areas of the Bristol Channel. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to the Free Speech Nation.
Ivy League universities under fire for anti-Semitism. Joey Barton vows to end women's involvement in men's football. And the media are calling male rapists female again. This is Free Speech Nation. Welcome to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. This is the show where we take a look at culture, current affairs and politics. And of course, we'll have the latest from those lovable culture warriors who this week are responsible for the alarming increase in the number of female prisoners. But coming up on the show tonight, should trans inmates be allowed to work and party in female prisons? I'll be talking to Kate Coleman from Keep Prisons Single Sex. Dennis Kavanagh joins me to discuss whether trans ideology is a threat to gay kids. And Spiked editor Tom Slater will discuss a new Danish law that prohibits the burning of religious books. And of course, myself and my fantastic panel will be answering questions from our rather beautiful studio audience. But I've got to introduce my panellists first. I have the comedians Bruce Devlin and Josh Howie. Both well, you're looking very funereal, the pair of you. You're all in black and your black tie. What's going on?
This is... there was a sale at TK Maxx.
Oh, it was a sale at TK Maxx. I thought you were mourning for the world. I thought you were going to be quite poetic about it.
Mourning for my bank balance.
Yeah, for your bank balance, quite, yeah.
I'm kind of in mourning because it's an audience with Kylie on ITV tonight and I'm here.
Oh, that's what it's about. OK. And black is very slimming, so, you know.
Oh, just called me fat.
No, I didn't.
Enjoy the show.
That's absolutely not what I meant, Bruce Devlin.
Rude.
What a start. Anyway, let's get our questions from our audience. So our first question is from Alan. Alan, where are you? Hi, Alan.
Hi, guys. After showing really pretty poor judgment this week, can the top US college leaders ever be trusted again?
This was my favourite story of the week. Well, if I say favourite, it's pretty shocking stuff. So this is the leaders, presidents of Harvard and MIT and Penn. You might have seen that they all appeared in Congress and they had to answer these questions about some of the more unsavoury things that are being said by student protesters on campus. Now, let's have a look at what was said in the clip.
Calling for the genocide of Jews violate MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment?
I have not heard calling for the genocide for Jews on our campus.
But you've heard chants for intifada.
I've heard chants, which can be anti-Semitic depending on the context, when calling for the elimination of the Jewish people.
At Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct?
If the
speech
becomes conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide? The speech is not harassment? This is unacceptable, Ms. McGill. And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
That is quite an incredible clip, isn't it? There is an easy answer to the question whether calling for the genocide of Jews violates your conduct. The answer is probably yes, I would have thought. You would hope. Anyway, Josh, what do you make of this?
Well, this is an issue that I've personally known about a long time. Jewish people have known about and have been calling out about it. And it is now we're seeing the leadership of these institutions, the highest educational institutions.
Well, these are the top universities.
Really, arguably in the world, we've got Oxford and Cambridge and whatnot. And you can see that the problem is at the top. And we've seen these marches. It's not just been over the last couple of months. This stuff has been going on for years now. And it's not just in America. It's been in the UK. We had an academic in Bristol who came up with some unbelievably, crazy stuff and got backed by hundreds of academics across the country. This stuff is embedded. And none of these institutions institutions have taken a stand, and this is why.
Well, no, here's the question. I mean, so a lot of people are raising the free speech argument here, which would be a lot more convincing if these universities hadn't been so quick to punish people, throw them out for microaggressions, for the slightest perceived offence where there wasn't even an offence, but calling for the genocide of Jews, that's OK.
Yeah.
Right, this is the thing. It's an incredible double standard.
It's unbelievable hypocrisy. Not that it's not like this is the first time the woke or the far left have been hypocritical.
No, of course not. No.
But that's almost like a defining characteristic of what it is to be woke.
So this is the question, because the woke have this idea that there are hierarchies of privilege, and they've put Jews at the top of that hierarchy. They say they're the most privileged, and so therefore they're not to be protected. That's the implication of this. But this sort of suggests how. I mean, had they been calling for the death of any other ethnic group, could those presidents have said, no, we're fine with that?
Well, it's about context and this and that. No, of course not. Yeah, I mean, it was a disgraceful display. One has since resigned, and this is the other thing, is that one has resigned, and there's calls for others to resign. But all this does is it's meat to the gristle for anti-Semites, because they go, oh look, this person's resigning, so Jews must be powerful. It's like, no, this person has been held accountable for their words and actions.
Well, I was talking to Peter Boghossian about this, and he made the case that people should stop giving money to their universities. The universities are now not the same place as when you went to university, right? They are now captured by an ideology, and so you're feeding money into a system that effectively promotes this kind of nonsense.
But they're getting that money from Qatar instead. So that's the difference. Is billions has been pumped in from Qatar, so they're following this ideology. Qatar, of course, housing Hamas, the leadership of Hamas at the moment, and putting this out there. So you can pull the funds back, and there are people who have taken their funds back. Yeah. But the question, for them, they're going, oh, am I going to have $1 billion here or 100 million?
I'm all for free speech on campus, Bruce, but, you know, it has to be applied consistently. And it looks as though, to me, it absolutely isn't here.
Well, yeah, no, I see what you're saying there. I mean, obviously, what they've said in terms of the whole context thing, I was like, you know...
What context would make that acceptable?
Exactly. I'm really not sure. I think that's the whole thing.
I mean, a lot of people are saying, well, the people in question weren't calling for the genocide of Jews. That's your misinterpretation of that. But I have heard people saying very explicit anti-Semitic things. And certainly I've heard people on campus supporting terrorist acts.
Yeah.
That's the case.
Can I say something? Here's the context. The context is, if it's coming from the far right, they would be like, that's terrible. But if it's coming from their political alignment and the far left, then suddenly it's acceptable and excuses can be made.
Do you think, I mean, just watching that clip, it seemed to me that those presidents, the three presidents in question, looked very nervous. They were grinning, smiling almost, but it looked like a nervous smile. It's almost like they were thinking, how can I get out of this? How can I get out of this without upsetting the crazy students who are going to protest and demand my resignation? Am I imagining that? That's what it looked like to me.
No, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, what do you think, Josh?
No, I mean, there was the woman in the middle that was, like, grinning. You could sort of say, if you were being generous, yes, it was nervousness, but it was a sort of smirk. Like, they were sort of out being super clever within the system and lawyery speak for what is a clear moral position.
And the president of Harvard has apologised since, but one suspects that's to do with the threats of funding being withdrawn. A lot of rich people are saying now, well, we don't want to fund you anymore, and that's fair enough. They can do what they want with their money. OK, we're going to move on to a question from Tommy. Where's Tommy? Hello, Tommy.
Hi, Andy.
Hiya. Well, both of you. Go on.
Why does Scotland want to make it easier for kids to change gender?
Yeah, you always have the good questions, you two. I think this is a very odd one. So, a court has found in favour of the UK government blocking Scotland's landmark gender law reforms. You'll remember this story because we covered it before. This was basically what happened is that the government in Scotland had lodged a court case against Westminster because Westminster had used a Section 35 order to block its gender recognition reform bill. Now, Josh, the SNP were told, weren't they, if you try and challenge this, you will lose. But they were also told before the bill had passed that this was a bad idea, that it didn't have the support of the majority of people in Scotland as it happened.
No, it didn't. But and they've wasted a whole load of Scottish money, taxpayers' money, on this, and there's already a deficit there. They have 21 days, or so, I believe, to call it in, to protest or whatever.
But let me ask the Scottish person on the panel, because you are representative of the nation tonight. So, Bruce, why would they go for this? Why would they bother?
Personally, I think... So we've just had a leadership contest in Scotland because Nicola had somewhere else to go.
Yeah,
I don't know
she was busy. She was doing her hair.
She's got an electric car now, but more of that later. But the fact of the matter is that the three main contenders... weren't particularly pro-LGBTQI+. So, and I'm speaking, this is conjecture on my part.
Yes.
Was it the case then, because they suffered some bad press by virtue of perhaps not turning up to vote on things? Kate Forbes was very vocal on the fact that although she's nothing against gay couples and all that kind of stuff, she couldn't in all consciousness support them. I'm not quoting
because of her religious beliefs, yes.
Because of her... Apparently she won't hang washing out on a Sunday. I don't know who's got the bigger problem. That's just me, though. So I
won't do that either, to be fair.
I don't do my own washing. But the fact of the matter is, I think it might have been something, and it might have been a PR thing or whatever.
Interesting.
But a lot of people are saying it's an affront to Scottish democracy, and then a lot of people are saying, well, we shouldn't have had devolution in the beginning because it just doesn't seem to have worked.
Well, that's the way a lot of politicians within the SNP are spinning it, and they're saying, you know, this just proves that we are beholden to Westminster and that this is a terrible situation. But, Josh, there were so many problems with that bill. I mean, there were amendments tabled. People tried to get them to change it so that same-sex wards in hospitals could be protected, so that women's prisons could be protected and wouldn't have male rapists installed in them, so that sex criminals on trial couldn't suddenly identify as women and apply for a GRC. So all of this stuff was there, was rejected by the SNP. That's why the bill was bad, surely.
No, it was ignored. This direct evidence of the stuff that we saw immediately bear fruit, having Isla Bryson being sent to a female jail, happened immediately. And then they sort of were like, oh, we hadn't considered this stuff, except for the fact that the experts had told them directly, this is what's going to happen.
And also the acquisition of a GRC, a gender reform certificate, or a recognition certificate, that would then be applicable in other parts of the UK.
Well, that's why that was the whole reason they called in the whole Section 35 thing, because it's different if you're just dealing with Scottish laws and Scottish people in terms of, you know, getting free subscriptions or something. That doesn't affect the rest of the country.
Yeah.
But this would change the law effectively for the rest of the country, which is why they called it into question. That's why it got cancelled.
OK, well, let's move on now to a question from Marcus. Have we got Marcus?
Yeah.
Hello.
Is Joey Barton wrong to criticise female pundits working in men's football?
Well, OK, so Joey Barton, he's provoked this huge backlash when he posted this series of tweets, or X's, or whatever we're meant to call them at the moment, and he said women shouldn't be talking with any kind of authority in football because it's a man's game. And then he doubled down. He had an interview with Piers Morgan and he doubled down on this. You know a lot about Joey Barton. You've been looking into this. What do you think, Bruce?
Well, this is a man who faked a French accent to say something about a mongoose at a finger buffet during a press conference. So is he...
Are you sure you're not dreaming that?
No,
that sounds surreal to me.
Did that not happen? Is Joey Barton not the one that started speaking in French?
He did, yeah.
No, he did.
Well, they're telling me he did, yeah.
No, well, thank you. Not you. But, yeah, so I'm just a bit like... But it was like the other day I was going through Instagram and a woman was telling me about erectile dysfunction disorder, and I thought, even if it was applicable to me, which it's not, I was like, why is she telling me this?
Yeah,
so I don't know, does he have a point, does he not? I mean, you know me, football.
Or is he just trying to gain attention for himself, maybe? I don't know.
Could he not then just speak in a German accent?
Yeah, exactly. He's clearly very good at accents.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah, good for him.
Actress.
What do you make of this, Josh? Do you think women should be involved in football punditry?
It's a wider issue here, can critics in general, which is if punditry is a form of criticism, can you listen to them when they haven't got expertise doing the actual thing that they're critiquing?
Interesting.
So...
Well, a lot of comedy critics are failed comedians,
Well,
aren't
that's
they?
it. But at least they've done it.
Yes.
So whether you can sort of listen to the word, or it's like... I do TV criticism as well.
Yes.
And I've made television, not just here. But so I feel like I can at least call attention to some of these things, having been inside the system.
Yeah.
The question is, are female ex-footballers... how relevant are they to the male game? That's his argument, is that the male game is different enough.
But why should it matter? Because you could do it vice versa, couldn't you? You could have a female footballer or an ex-female footballer commenting on a men's game. That would make sense to me.
Well, that's what he's saying, is can you have a female ex-footballer...
Well, they do it in tennis. All the time they do it in tennis.
Well, but again, there are people who might say that there are different... Tennis, I would say, arguably even more so, is a very different game between the female game and the male game. The male game is much more about power, it's about the serve, whereas female is much more about the ground court. Okay. So there is an argument to be made there. I'm not saying that makes him right, but I think it goes to a wider argument of whether anybody who doesn't do that thing specifically can then... their opinion is valid or not.
OK, very interesting. OK, let's get another question. This one is from Ryan.
Good evening. Is the national anthem offensive?
Do you mean
the
just
German
in terms
one?
of the, well, yeah, in terms of the sound of it, the melody? Do you mean?
Personally, I don't think it is, but
No.
I think in terms of the lyrics.
Well, this is Bristol University, so they dropped the national anthem from its graduation ceremonies. They said it's got the potential to cause offence. What do you think of that, Josh? I mean, is it just one of these other things where, you know, a couple of people say, you know, this is a small story that we're blowing out of proportion, or is actually there something significant?
No, it is massively significant.
Is it?
And it's endemic of what we see of this reason for the show. I think it's an absolutely disgusting decision. The idea that someone could find the national anthem offensive and we have to cater to their...
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it?
It's disgusting.
I mean, Bruce, there is something changing in our culture whereby we are prioritising the feelings of people who are offended by things, whereas sometimes it's OK to say, it's fine being offended, but we're not going to change anything for you because the world doesn't revolve around you.
No, I completely agree. I do not understand. And again, it's a word you came with earlier, with arrogance, to do with Just Stop Oil people. You know, why is your offence so much more important than anything else?
Yes.
You as one individual. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't have the right to reply or to air opinions.
Or to be offended even. Nothing wrong with being offended.
Yeah, but do you have to be offended all the time? Can you not just kind of think, do you know what? I don't like baked beans. I'm not going to eat them.
It's so exhausting being offended all the time. I find this...
I have friends who are knackered.
Yeah,
honestly.
of course.
They're just whining the whole time.
I mean, it's so funny, like, when I put a tweet out and someone underneath complains about, oh, I'll never watch this, it makes me so angry, I just think, calm down. It's fine. You don't have to tell everyone that you're upset about this. Just don't watch it, and no one's going to care.
But specifically being offended by the national anthem.
Yeah.
It's
quite dreary, isn't it?
We have problems in this country, but this is a great country, and the idea that someone's going to be offended by it, I'm sorry, you can just go.
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry, I feel very strongly
Josh is getting very militant on this. No, I like militant Josh. We want more of that.
Okay. Do we know if the person that complained about this initially is from this country or not, by the way?
Not anymore!
Well, look, on that note, next on Free Speech Nation, will the row over the Elgin Marbles between Greece and the UK ever be resolved? Don't go anywhere.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GBNews, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet?
What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. The argument over whether the UK should return the Elgin Marbles to Greece broke out again last month after Rishi Sunak accused the Greek Prime Minister of trying to grandstand over the Parthenon sculptures. Sunak defended cancelling a meeting with the Greek PM and said it had become clear the meeting was not to discuss substantive issues for the future. Well, will there ever be an end to this dispute? I'm delighted to be joined by writer and author Tiffany Jenkins. Welcome to the show, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Now, Tiffany has written this fantastic book, and I read this recently, and I would urge everyone to read it. This is called Keeping Their Marbles. But it's a book that's not just about the Elgin Marbles. You also cover all sorts of other aspects of repatriation for museums. But let's just start with the Elgin Marbles. Elgin took these, brought them. They are now in the British Museum. They've been there ever since. What's the background to this? Why? Because it was always controversial, wasn't it?
The Acropolis itself and the Parthenon was controversial when it was first built by Pericles in 432 BC.
Oh, so this goes
yes,
way
it's
back.
Like a really, it's a long history to it. I mean, it was controversial at the time because it was a very flamboyant and expensive project.
Yes.
And it would have been a kind of knockback to the Persians, who they just had a war with. It was a sort of trophy after a war.
Yes.
Come the 19th century, Greece wasn't a state at that stage. It was under the Ottoman Empire. So many travellers hadn't been able to get there. The Turks were having wars with Venice. But finally, sort of, come the 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, you have a kind of opening up. And you also have a particular moment where people began to get interested in antiquity. Up until that point, they weren't really that interested. You know, when the British Museum was first opened, it was full of objects and artefacts from the voyages of discovery. There was no antiquity in there. At that very moment, it was also used as a garrison by the Turks, and there was a mosque in there.
In the Parthenon?
In the Parthenon.
Yeah.
It was ruined.
Yes.
I mean, it was just a ruin. People were taking bricks and parts of it for their houses and grinding it up and all the rest of it.
Yes.
So it's not what we recognise today as this sort of an archaeological site.
That's very interesting, because you mentioned in the book, and I didn't know before reading your book, that even at the time Lord Elgin wasn't sure about taking the marbles, but he decided to do so to preserve them. He felt they were actually in danger if they remained in Athens.
They were in danger, and the French were also eyeing them up, as were the Germans.
Yes.
So he may have kind of... it may have been for sort of self-aggrandizement. It was originally for his home.
Yes.
But then it kind of... They just became overcome by the beauty of it, and they started taking it not just sort of drawings and casts. They did take a few from the building.
And one of the things you trace in your book is the impact of the Parthenon marbles in London on the artistic community, you know, on the very idea of aesthetics. You know, it's very, very important that they were there, I suppose, and they did preserve them.
They definitely preserved them. I think the interesting thing about when they arrived in London, and they were initially at his home in Park Lane, is that people rowed about what they were actually like, because they had this idea of what they were like. But when they actually saw the real things, in a way they were disappointed.
Oh, really?
Yes, because they had you know those Roman sculptures that they've got all their arms?
Yes.
They're really poised, they're really white, and then these battered Greek sculptures with half an arm kind of left on the floor somewhere. They're much more dynamic and vibrant as sculptures.
Yes.
So there's a big row over them as to whether they're any good or not. There was a discussion about actually restoring them and sanding them down and all the rest of it.
Yes, didn't they clean them in a very bad way?
That was the 1930s.
Oh,
that was
right.
later. So, but come this moment, you have this shift. You have this shift in taste away from Rome, which all the collectors are obsessed with, towards towards ancient Athens and this sort of much more romantic feeling.
Now, Byron felt it was vandalism to take these.
He did, and there was that sort of, in keeping with that kind of romantic ideal, there was a sense that actually they should be just allowed to crumble further. Byron didn't want them to go into the Acropolis Museum or anything like that, which obviously didn't exist. He wanted them to just decay.
Right, OK.
Be eroded by time.
So this dispute has been going on a long time. There have been arguments from the very moment that Elgin brought them back, and we're still rowing about it today, and it's become a very politicised idea. Now, I have to say, I also read Christopher Hitchens' book on the Parthenon marbles, or the Elgin marbles. Even what you call them is contentious.
Yes.
And I have to say, I was persuaded. I was reading it and I was persuaded. I thought, OK, particularly aesthetically, I've been to the Acropolis Museum, I've seen the remaining marbles, and I did think to myself how wonderful it would be to have them all in one place with the view of the Parthenon, of the Acropolis over the way. That did persuade me. But then reading your book, and I was persuaded to your point of view, so I'm very undecided on this issue. So could you summarise, what is your argument for keeping the marbles in the UK?
I mean, I think it's reasonable to be persuaded either way, go back and forth. I was in Athens over the summer, and the museum, the Acropolis Museum, is elegant. And there you do see the Acropolis itself.
Yes.
And it makes sense of the Acropolis.
It does.
It also makes sense of that kind of particular moment of the Parthenon sculptures, because you see the sculptures that came before it, and they're really static and kind of stiff and almost like kind of robot dolls or something. And then the Parthenon sculptures come up and they're leaping around, and horses have pulsing veins on their long nose and all the rest of it. So you do get a particular sense of place and origin there. But in the British Museum, you get a different story that is complementary. I think you see it, if you walk into the British Museum, you kind of walk through the Egyptian galleries, the Persian galleries, you know, the Assyrians and the kind of enemy of Athens, and you see through comparison how distinctive the Parthenon
Absolutely,
is.
yes.
And so does it help us to better understand the Parthenon in the British Museum? Without question.
Right.
It does, in a way that it can't at the Acropolis Museum, and vice versa. You know, so it's complementary.
But I suppose a lot of the debate has been reduced to this idea that museums are effectively driving imperialism. Now, you make the argument in your book that they benefited from imperialism, but they didn't drive it. Is it reductive to say that museums are effectively centres where we present the spoils of conquest, and that we should therefore send them back?
I think we have to look at what museums actually do, which is help us understand particular cultures and their particular moments through comparison. They take us out of our ordinary lives when we go in to see them and almost act like a time machine. You know, they can actually teach us a little bit about imperialism and colonialism.
Yes.
Although it has to be said it was the Ottomans, in the case of Greece.
Well, that's right.
Who were under, and obviously the Parthenon itself was built not just when Athens was at its most democratic, but its most imperial.
Yes,
you know,
and
the
Elgin
slaves sort of built it and all the rest of it. So
it's morally complicated.
It's morally complicated.
And didn't Elgin seek permission from the Ottomans?
Yes, and he got it. He got a firman. But, you know, permission today is very different when you have kind of contracts the size of an elephant.
Yes,
you know,
of course.
with everything dotted and all the rest.
So what do you make of this argument that, you know, because museums around the world are facing this reckoning at the moment? Do we return everything? Because do you feel that museums have become essentially politicised at the moment?
I think it's important to note that culture has always been political. When you had the vision that we have of the Acropolis today is a 19th century vision with the Bavarian monarchy seeking to show that the new Greek state was actually not just a kind of new invention. It went back centuries. Equally, when Britain acquired the marbles, there was a sense that it would restore some sort of democratic ideal within Britain. So there's politics around. But now, in a way, there's kind of... It's all instrument, and there's no understanding of ancient Athens. I mean, the interesting thing about this discussion recently with the Greek Prime Minister and Rishi Sunak was that it had absolutely nothing to do with the Parthenon. You learnt nothing. And I think we need to get back to a situation where actually museums can tell us about the past, not moralise or lecture us, which is what they're doing now, and which I don't think anybody really likes, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on.
But hasn't that argument been lost in a way? Because I can't go to a museum these days without being lectured by these little placards that appear by various artefacts or even artworks, just telling me how evil the artist was, you know.
Yes, and how wrong you are to look at it.
Exactly.
It's a very serious problem. It's something that's been in the making for probably like 40 years.
Yes.
I think what's really important to understand about about the repatriation argument is that, in many cases, those calling for repatriation most loudly and most passionately are actually Western curators.
Right.
They're not, activists or indigenous groups or whatever. It's sort of, there's this kind of, let's chuck them out of the door, which is one of the things that you're having at the moment with the Benin bronzes. So there's this sort of internal crisis.
Yes.
They haven't been captured. It's come almost internally.
Are you suggesting that social justice activists like to speak on other people's behalf? Outrageous.
They certainly do. But my point is it's come from within. I don't think they've been captured. I think they've birthed it.
Yes.
I mean, in a way, they've created the activists from without.
Yes.
And I think, there's a wonderful story about an anthropologist in America returning some human remains, which have also been subject to great controversy, to a tribe, and the person who's receiving them is interviewed, and he says, well, we didn't really want them, but it'd be rude not to, because this guy was so kind of enthusiastic. And so there's this sort of, that dynamic is very strong and profound, but I think the reassuring thing is, if you want to kind of, my perspective on whether we should be optimistic or pessimistic, is that I think the majority of audiences do not like it. And the objects themselves still speak. So if you go to the Duveen galleries and look at the Elgin Marbles, they will still tell you something about Athens, 2,500 years ago, regardless of the social justice.
Absolutely right. Tiffany Jenkins, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Thank you. And next on Free Speech Nation, should trans inmates in prisons be allowed to work and party in the female estate? Don't go anywhere.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Later in the show, I'll be turning agony uncle with the help of my wonderful panel, Bruce Devlin and Josh Howie. And we're going to help you deal with your unfiltered dilemmas. If you've got any problems at all, then just email us at gbviews@gbnews.com and we'll do our best to answer your problems. A new Scottish prison service policy will mostly keep trans inmates with a history of violence against women out of female Scottish jails. But according to a new report, the inmates could still be allowed to mingle with female prisoners. The report says transgender people in custody should be provided the opportunity and supported to work towards being accommodated in an estate that aligns with their affirmed gender, so that on release to the community, they have had the opportunity to live with those who share their affirmed gender. Those trans prisoners deemed too dangerous to be given a permanent swap into the female estate could also be offered visitation rights to women's jails to allow them to mingle with female inmates. Here's another quotation. An individualised approach was also seen to offer flexibility to the management of transgender individuals in prison. While it may be necessary to accommodate transgender individuals in a prison which does not align with their affirmed gender, there may be other ways of supporting their gender identity, for example, through access to work parties, activities, or even programmes with others of their gender identity. By participating in activities and programmes in that estate while remained housing in the estate which aligns with their gender assigned at birth, where it is deemed safe to do so for the individual and for others. Now, prison leaders in Scotland have also been accused of secrecy after ruling that they will no longer confirm the number of male-bodied transgender inmates serving sentences in women's jails. The director of Keep Prisons Single Sex, Kate Coleman, joins me now. Welcome to the show, Kate. OK, there's a lot to get through here, but it sounds like the authorities in Scotland are saying that, to a degree, we need to accommodate people according to their beliefs about who they are as opposed to the biological reality of who they are. Is that a fair assessment?
I mean, I think it goes further than that, actually, if you start unpicking what's actually happening with this policy. And I think the first thing to say is that the policy document itself is extremely light on details. There's nothing of substance to it. You only uncover the reality of what's going on if you read the supplementary documentation, the Equality and Human Rights Impact Assessment and the Data Protection Impact Assessment.
So what is that reality?
It's hidden. So the reality is that at the heart of this policy is the presumption that this group of men, and I'm going to call them men because they are men, who assume a transgender identity should be facilitated as much as possible, to the highest degree as possible, to being allowed to go into the female estate. And where that will enable them to be transferred there, that is what should happen. And even for that very small number of prisoners that the Scottish Prison Service will deem to be posing an unacceptable level of risk to women in prison, that it appears that they should still be allowed to go there, you know, for day release, for activities, for programmes, pending release, in order that they can practice being women. And
Can I ask,
it's just, I'm disgusted.
have the women in these prisons been consulted about what they think about it? Because it just sounds to me like you're prioritising there, or they are prioritising the feelings of those individuals. My understanding is that a lot of the women in prisons are particularly vulnerable. A lot of them have experienced domestic abuse and violence at the hands of men. Blunt head, force trauma to the head, all sorts of horrendous things. There's a reason why they don't want to be around men, yes?
Well, exactly. I mean, it's not rocket science.
No.
There's a reason why prisons are segregated by sex, or, you know, they're not, but there's a reason why on the face of it they are segregated by sex. It's not rocket science. We know why that is as a society, but you're quite right. Where you have the preferences, the feelings, the desires of this particular group of men, it seems that the Scottish Prison Service is willing to bend over backwards to accommodate it. And I think what we can contrast this with is the Ministry of Justice. They also released a revised policy back in March, and they take a very, very different perspective. They've had a very radical shift where they're now placing the safety of women right at the heart of the policy. Is it perfect? No, it's not. Will it see no men being in women's prisons? It's unlikely, but it is still a dramatic shift. So for that policy, we see that any man with any conviction for a violent or sexual offence, not just against women, cannot be accommodated in the female estate. Separately to that, and separately from any consideration of conviction, any man who has intact male genitalia cannot be accommodated in the female estate. exceptions to that can only ever be considered if there is the very highest degree of confidence in only the very lowest level of risk to women in prison, and then it has to be signed off by the director of HMPPS, His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, and then it has to go to the minister for sign-off. So you have more restrictions, you have the safety of women at its heart, and you have that level of a personal accountability. Whereas with the Scottish Prison Service, the starting presumption is, well, no, we should be facilitating these men to go into women's prisons, and if they're not safe enough to be housed there on a permanent basis, then, you know, we should still let them access activities. And, you know, to use, as you say, vulnerable women in prison as props, as non-consensual props, in order that this group of men can practice being women, it's obscene.
I think a lot of people watching will be surprised. And, you know, whenever we cover this on the show, as we do a lot of people comment and say they had no idea this was going on. Because, you know, you take the case of Adam Graham, who a double rapist who decided to identify as Isla Bryson, and then was housed in a female prison while they were making this risk assessment. What risk assessment do you need more than the fact that he's a man with a double conviction for rape?
Well, exactly. Exactly. It shouldn't even be a question.
So why is it happening?
Why is it happening? Well, that's an excellent question, isn't it? I mean, you know, Scotland has, you know, pardon any Scottish people in the audience, but it has pretty much gone to the dogs, hasn't it? You know,
in terms of these issues,
in terms of this issue,
a lot of Scottish people would agree with you. To be fair,
it really has gone to the dogs. I think, I mean, we know going back to when the first Scottish Prison Service policy on this was put in place in sort of 2014, in the run-up to that, there was very much a concerted effort to get this passed in prisons because, you know, as you say, you know, prisons, it's very hidden. You don't know what's going on. You know, the Isla Bryson splashed across the front page are a rarity.
Yes.
And, you know, unfortunately, most people in the general public, they don't care about prisoners and they don't care about women in prison, you know?
So that might be the problem.
It's an easy win. It's an easy win. And if you can make it work in a prison, then you can set that precedent and you can start rolling it out to the sectors and the services where people might care more. So schools and hospitals, nursing homes, you know, sports centres, you know, those kind of areas. You can go, well, we've got this precedent, it works in prison. You know, the reason why it works in prison is because, you know, the reports aren't coming out. And as you quite rightly said, you know, the Scottish Prison Service has now changed their policy on data reporting, and they will no longer be publishing the numbers of male prisoners held in the female estate. So we won't be able to track this. We will not know what impact this new policy has, and we will not be able to find out how many of the ones who are deemed not safe enough to be housed in the female estate are still being allowed over for, you know, work parties, you know, whatever it is that they're doing.
So what can we do about this? I mean, surely we need these authorities to record data accurately. That's clearly something that matters.
Yeah, it matters a great deal. I think at the moment, I mean, this policy is live now, but it will be fully implemented in February of next year. So, you know, we've got a 2-3 month window of opportunity to apply as much political pressure as possible to get this changed.
Yeah. Well, good luck with it. Kate Coleman, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And coming up next on Free Speech Nation, it'll be time for our monthly Culture Roundup with historian and writer David Oldroyd-Bolt. See you in a couple of minutes.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet?
What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. It's time now for our monthly look at culture and the arts with historian and writer David Oldroyd Bolt. Hello, David. Welcome back. Always a pleasure to talk to you. What's been happening this month?
Well, the poet Benjamin Zephaniah has died aged 65, very shortly after being diagnosed with a brain tumour. And Zephaniah is probably the most important black poet and writer in Britain of the past half century. I mean, he really brought poetry, performance poetry, into public consciousness. His was a fascinating story. He was born in Birmingham, and he was one of 8 children in an abusive family. When his mother escaped, he was the only child to go with her. His mother had been beaten often by his father, and they had to essentially go from place to place to escape his father. He was involved in crime as a child, went to Borstal, and then was later sentenced to prison for burglary, and was functionally illiterate until he was in his early 20s.
Incredible.
But from childhood had begun writing poetry in his head. And he once said that being a poet in Birmingham as an 11-year-old black kid at that time was as difficult as coming out as gay. And he said when you found another poet, it was something he would talk about and sort of something that he would say, you know, show me mine if I'll show you yours, as it were. And there was one of his lines which is, I used to think nurses were women, I used to think police were men, I used to think poets were boring until I became one of them.
Yes.
Which I think shows there was that cultural clash within himself about it.
He was one of those poets that you would always see on mainstream television. Yes. He was very visible about it. He did a lot of good for the idea of poetry, which became very, as you say, people thought it was boring, even himself.
And for bringing young black men into the idea of literacy and engagement with literacy. He wrote 4 novels specifically to appeal to that audience.
Yes.
And because he himself, as I said, had been functionally illiterate until his early 20s, when he moved to London and went to night school in Newham in East London, he was very concerned with the fact that poor boys, particularly poor black boys, were much more likely to be illiterate and much more likely, therefore, to be disengaged from culture generally.
Yes, a very sad loss. What else has been happening this month that you're particularly interested in?
Well, I think, again, talking of identity in the arts, there is a film about to be released on Netflix called Maestro about the most consequential figure in American music, Leonard Bernstein. Leonard Bernstein was a conductor, a composer, a pianist. I'm sure your viewers will know his works, particularly West Side Story.
Yes, of course.
Which was an enormous hit. And he also wrote On the Waterfront and On the Town and Candide and the Chichester Psalms and The Age of Anxiety. It goes on and on. At every point in American history after the war, he was there. At the funeral of JFK, he conducted Mahler's Resurrection Symphony.
Yes.
In Israel after the Six-Day War, he conducted. In Berlin after the fall of the Berlin Wall, he was there. He was this enormous figure.
He's one of those composers who can really sort of cross the boundaries between real high art and popular culture. I mean, West Side Story, we can all hum the tunes, but it's incredibly complex, similarly with Candide.
Oh, exceptional music.
Yeah.
I mean, it is music of the very highest artistic standard. He was pilloried by some because they thought he was selling himself out. But actually what he was doing was bringing truly great music to people everywhere. I mean, the film of West Side Story must have been seen by I don't know, 1 billion, 2 billion people now since its release.
And, of course, a new version by Steven Spielberg as well.
Very much.
So what has been the controversy with the latest film? Because it hasn't gone smoothly, has it?
No, there has been some idea. Bradley Cooper, who stars as Bernstein and is the director, decided that he was going to wear a prosthetic nose to make himself look more like Bernstein, who, if you look at the photos of him, had a very large nose.
Yes.
But there are some, particularly Jewish people, who've decided that this was akin to blackface. They called it Jewface. So Tracy Ann Oberman, the actor here, and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons, have both said that they thought that this was unnecessary, that he should have acted as Bernstein without needing to wear it. However, others, including Bernstein's 3 children, have said that they thought that this was part of becoming the character. They had no problem with it at all, and that they didn't consider it a sort of racist thing.
I mean, I understand both sides of the argument in that respect, but I do think when it comes to things like that, it's quite clear to me that the actor was doing his utmost to look and to resemble as closely as possible Bernstein. I mean, I think we can all agree he wasn't going out of his way to cause offence.
Yes,
right?
he wasn't doing what old productions of Merchant of Venice did and portraying Shylock with this enormous, grotesque and obviously caricatured nose.
Yes.
This was not some general Jewish character, the nose signifying Jewishness. This is the likeness of a man who existed and looked like this.
Yes.
And I think, therefore, there is the artistic case for it. Of course, being aware of sensitivities, but the fact that Bernstein's own children, who are Jewish, have given it their imprimatur, I think, shows that it's fine.
There's a lot. Often there we have these debates surrounding, particularly works of popular culture, the movies, for instance, things like that. Do you think that this detracts from these works of art? When we get into these debates,
it can overshadow it.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's been criticised about the film by people who have praised it in general is that it concentrates too much on Bernstein's private life. He was absolutely flagrantly bisexual, and his wife was very much hurt by this, as opposed to concentrating on the enormous effect of his music making and his educational programmes and so on.
But it is a biopic, isn't it?
This is a story for the cinema. I think it is, from what I've seen so far. Obviously, it's not out yet. It's out on December the 20th on Netflix. It is faithful to his story, but there has to be some human interest, as it were. It can't just be a documentary, because they exist already.
Absolutely. David Aldroyd-Bolt, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is the end of the first hour on Free Speech Nation. Very sad, but don't go anywhere, because there is a lot more to come between now and 9 o'clock, including barrister Dennis Kavanagh, who joins me to discuss whether trans ideology is a threat to gay kids, and also the editor of Spiked magazine, Tom Slater, who's going to be discussing a new Danish law that prohibits the burning of religious books. See you shortly.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. Unsettled weather continues as low pressure remains very much in charge of our weather over the next couple of days. Storm Fergus, situated out to the west, slowly moves its way towards us through Sunday evening and into the start of Monday, bringing with it some very heavy rainfall, particularly to northern parts of England, where the ground is already very saturated, so we could see some localised flooding through the early hours of Monday morning. Some strong winds too, particularly across western Wales and through the Bristol Channel, where we could see gusts up to 60 miles an hour. Temperatures in the south generally around 7 or 8 degrees, but a much colder night across the northern parts of Scotland, where we could see some icy conditions, particularly across the southwest of Scotland through Monday morning. A cloudy start across the northern half of the UK on Monday, some showers continuing along those eastern coasts of Scotland, but generally Monday will be a much more settled day for most of us. Plenty of sunshine as we head through the afternoon, and with some lighter winds, temperatures around 10 to 12 degrees across the south. It'll be feeling a little more pleasant than we've seen over recent days. Tuesday starts a much cloudier picture though. Rain continues to push its way northwards through Tuesday morning, again bringing some very heavy rainfall to eastern parts of Scotland, where again we could see some localised flooding due to that saturated ground. Further south, there'll be plenty of heavy showers pushing in from the southwest and quite a blustery feeling day too. Remaining unsettled through Tuesday and Wednesday, but hints of something a little more settled are on the horizon through Thursday and Friday.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There is plenty more still to come on Free Speech Nation tonight. The media are calling male rapists female again. Dennis Kavanagh joins me to discuss whether trans ideology is a threat to gay kids. Spiked editor Tom Slater will discuss a new Danish law that prohibits the burning of religious books. But first, let's get a news update from Sophia.
Good evening, I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. GB News understands tomorrow Tory MPs will give their verdict on whether the Rwanda bill is workable. Conservative MP Sabil Cash will present the findings ahead of the crunch second vote on Tuesday. The Prime Minister has come under pressure after it was discovered he paid £240 million towards the Rwanda plan without a single flight taking off. Tory sources say the MPs will decide whether to support the legislation tomorrow or, if necessary, hold a second meeting ahead of the vote. Met Police say 2 teenage girls have been arrested on suspicion of robbery after a woman was attacked in London. A warning, this video shows distressing images. Footage of the attack has been circulating on social media, showing the 20-year-old walking in Stamford Hill and then being robbed and beaten. The woman, who is from the Orthodox Jewish community, was reportedly left bruised but didn't need to go to hospital. Met Police say it's keeping an open mind about the motive for the attack, but are treating it as a possible hate crime. McDonald's has apologised after footage posted on social media showed a security guard mopping the floor where a homeless man was sitting. The video was taken on Victoria Street in London last night and shows the man trying to move his sleeping bag and duvet away from the water as it seeped underneath. In the video, he says, "Leave me alone," before one security guard kicks a blanket out of the way and splashes more water along the pavement. McDonald's said it was shocked and saddened by the footage. Baroness Michelle Mone says she made an error in publicly denying her links to the PPE firm MedPro. It was awarded government contracts worth more than £200 million to supply personal protective equipment after she recommended it to ministers. The National Crime Agency is investigating the firm and its connection to the Conservative peer. Lady Mone argues she's being used as a scapegoat by the government for its own COVID failings. Fresh weather warnings have been issued as Storm Fergus sweeps across the country. Leitrim Village in Ireland has been hit by a possible tornado as homes and cars are seriously damaged. Emergency services were called after high winds from Storm Meterion flattened trees, ripped up roofs and buildings and left debris scattered on the streets. Yellow weather warnings and over 40 flood warnings have been issued across England and Scotland. Gale force winds are likely to hit South Wales and areas around the Bristol Channel. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. And now it's back to Free Speech Nation.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. A shocking story appeared on the BBC News website yesterday. It was about one Naomi O'Brien of Thameside, who had been jailed for directing a Welsh man to abuse a 4-year-old child. Now, the headline reads, "Predatory woman who incited man to abuse child for jailed." What the article doesn't tell you is that Naomi O'Brien is a man. Throughout the article, he's referred to with she, her pronouns. You have to use the evidence of your own eyes to get the truth. And we've been here many times before. Look at this horrific article from the BBC in March 2022. Pensioner arrested after dismembered body found. The article begins with these lurid details. A pensioner has been arrested on suspicion of killing and dismembering a 68-year-old woman she met online. An adult female torso was found in a bag inside a shopping trolley near 83-year-old Harvey Marcelin's apartment in Brooklyn, New York. She has now been charged with second-degree murder and concealment of a human corpse. Marcelin had previously spent more than 50 years in prison for killing 2 female friends. Some of you might sense something is amiss here. There are very few female serial killers and even fewer who target other women. It just doesn't sound like a woman's crime, does it? And that's because it isn't. You have to read to the very bottom of this BBC article before the writer mentions that the killer had only, quote, recently identified as a woman. This detail is presented as an aside, as though it was an inconsequential aspect of the case, but it's fairly crucial. And the examples are endless. So according to journalists, this is a woman who was imprisoned for sexual assault. This is a woman who was arrested for making bomb threats. This is a woman who was jailed for stabbing and for false imprisonment. This is a woman who was jailed for paedophilic abuse. And this is a woman who exposed her penis and used a wheelie bin as a sex toy in public. So let's be truthful about this. All of these criminals are men. And that shouldn't surprise us. Men are far more likely to be criminals than women. There are currently 84,000 men in prison, as compared with just 3,500 women. And according to figures from the Ministry of Justice, 98% of those convicted of sex offences are male. And yet, if you believed the mainstream media, you'd think there'd been an exponential increase in the numbers of women committing sexual assaults. Well, you might say the media is just following the language used by the police. And they would have a point. Let's go back to this week's news that a man calling himself Naomi O'Brien has been convicted for inciting child abuse. So here's a statement from D.I. Marsden of the Greater Manchester Police's online child abuse investigation team. This is a significant result for what is a very vulnerable and innocent 4-year-old child who was subjected to multiple counts of abuse, but also for all the other children in the community who could have been subject to similar offending by a predatory female who was inciting others to commit acts of sexual harm against the most vulnerable in society. But there was no predatory female in this case, and the police know that. And nor is there any legal obligation for them to refer to O'Brien as a woman. That's a fact that not many people realise. Now, the guidance for the police is muddled at best, and practice is completely inconsistent across the country. A Freedom of Information request by the group Keep Prisons Single Sex found that of the 24 police forces who replied, 15 said they recorded suspects by gender identity, and just 2 record on the basis of biological sex. In other words, the police appear to be making it up as they go along. When a suspect identifies as non-binary, many police forces record that sex as indeterminate or non-specified, even though non-binary does not exist as a category in English law. As a result of all of this, crime statistics in the UK are being skewed. And there's a very simple solution to it all. Just record suspects and criminals by biological sex. And if you must, record gender identity if a particular criminal claims to have such a thing, but record that separately. Although why the metaphysical beliefs of criminals need to be recorded is beyond me. It's important that we have accurate crime statistics. At the moment, we have no way of knowing how many of these female rapists are actually men. And it's also important that we stop male criminals from using this religion of gender identity as a loophole to be moved to women's prisons. So let's take Adam Graham, the double rapist who thought that wearing a dodgy wig and calling himself Isla Bryson might get him housed in the female estate. And he was accommodated in a female prison while the Scottish Government was conducting a risk assessment. What risk assessment might one need? He's a double rapist. Still, at least he didn't get away with it. Unlike David Thompson, the rapist and paedophile, who called himself Karen White and was then transferred to a women's prison where he went on to sexually assault 2 female inmates. So what do we do about all of this? Well, it would seem that the UK police are ideologically captured, but perhaps the media could start telling the truth. After all, there is no legal obligation for journalists to lie about the sex of a criminal. Of course, if they're quoting from a court case and a criminal has been referred to with different pronouns, they are obliged to quote accurately. But most of these articles are about convicted criminals, so there's no justification for the inaccuracy. Many media outlets claim that they're simply following style guides, but none of these style guides are compulsory. After all, the Associated Press style guide in the US suggests that when referring to skin colour, the word black should be capitalised and the word white left in lowercase. But many, if not most, media outlets just ignore that because they recognise that it's ideologically driven and racially divisive. So why can't they do the same in the case of gender? Even IPSO, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, does not mandate that journalists should use the preferred pronouns of criminals. Now, the guidelines do ask journalists to consider whether they have used the pronouns that the individual uses to describe themselves, but it's absolutely not demanded. However, one of the things that IPSO does clearly say in its guidance is this: journalists should take care not to publish inaccurate and misleading information. Now, it's the same for televised journalism. Ofcom does not mandate using preferred pronouns of criminals, which is just as well, because I'd rather not be forced to lie to my viewers. So given that it is wholly voluntary for media outlets to do this, why do they keep on doing it? Even right-leaning newspapers are at it, so we can't really put this down to party politics. So to all those editors and journalists out there who are going along with this nonsense, I would ask you to please think again. This policy is embarrassing, it's unprofessional, and it's dangerous. You don't need to pretend that male sex offenders are women just because they say they are. You don't need to worry about the hurt feelings of rapists and paedophiles. Your job is to report the truth. So stop lying to the public. So, returning, I've got my studio guests this evening, Bruce Devlin and Josh Howie. I just spoke about this problem that we have with the media misrepresenting the truth. I mean, I often read these articles, you know, you click through, it says that a woman has been arrested or a woman has done this or that, and you think, wow, that's really rare for women. You read it, and then by the end you're like, oh, it's a bloke.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, so what do we do about this?
Well, like you say, they have to stop lying, but it's worse than that. When you have to absorb news in a way that you're trying to filter the actual truth out of it. That you read a news story and all you're trying to do is actually get to the nub of it. And it's not just about this. It's like many ideologically captured arenas, like trying to find who murdered somebody, the reasons they might have done it, if there was a homophobic attack.
Yes.
You know, but you're reading it and you're trying to get the clues to what actually happened.
Yeah.
That's not what the media is there for. The media, whether it's newspapers, is meant to tell us this stuff.
There's a really good example of that. So recently in Ireland, there was that horrific murder of that young girl, and there was a witness statement by a relative, I think it was her partner, and the Irish media redacted the witness statement because they were worried it might inflame racial tension, because he was referring to the fact that the killer was a migrant. But it's not really the media's job to decide what is best for you to hear. The media's job is surely just to tell you the facts and trust the public to be able to...
And that trust of the media, of the public, has what's absolutely disappeared over the last 10, 20 years. That's why you need a channel, you know, like GB News, that's coming on, that hopefully is at least pulling back and saying this is what we believe to be true in this situation. I'm not saying that GB News gets everything perfect, but the fact is that the media are bringing this upon themselves.
So this question, Bruce, you know, a lot of people will say, you know, if a friend of mine transitions or identifies as the other sex, I'll happily use the pronouns they want. That's fine. But we're talking about rapists, serial killers. Why do we have to respect... Why do they deserve our courtesy?
I don't understand why the victims aren't up front and centre. That would be my point initially, sort of thing. And we can have a laugh at whether we think the wigs are dodgy and all that kind of thing.
A lot of them are. Let's be honest.
Back to Trump. But what I was going to say, it just seems to be the fact that we're not focusing on those who have been wronged, particularly inciting someone to abuse a 4-year-old. I mean,
right, exactly.
It's so disgusting.
So the guidelines, for instance, for the legal, for the judges, is that the guidelines say that they should use the preferred pronouns of someone, even if they've committed a horrible crime. But again, it's not mandatory. And of course, if you're the victim of a rape or a sexual assault, you don't want to have to call your attacker she, you know, because that's a kind of extra humiliation from the horrendous experience you've already had. So surely, shouldn't we just start saying that there is such a thing as biological reality, which matters when it comes to crime, but there's also a thing that some people believe, that they have a gender identity, and that's a separate thing. You know, I think both can be sort of accommodated.
Why is it the case, then, aren't we told that this isn't necessary, and, you know, there's no legally binding case in which to refer to people by their preferred pronouns or whatever, if you see it? Because I didn't know that until I'd heard that tonight.
Well, exactly. No, not many people do know that. And it's a particular problem for the prison estate, and it's a particular problem for victims of sexual violence. So back to the media, you know, and this is something I'm really keen to emphasise. Media outlets make a choice to do this. And, you know, you look at, like, the Daily Mail and you expect them not to... But they go along with it as well. Left-leaning, right-leaning, doesn't matter where they are, they all do. But there is no reason why they should. So is it just about journalists being a bit more... well, I think a bit more self-respect. I'd be embarrassed if an article of mine was published and I was calling a rapist she. Or I was, you know, if they changed my copy to make that happen.
They're undermining themselves. They're destroying themselves from within, and you need strong leadership at the top of those institutions to go, no, we're not going to do this. Our job is to print the truth. And as you say, they can say this is the biological sex and this is what this person identifies.
You could easily say that, absolutely. And I fear that this, as well, is doing a horrendous thing. I mean, I've had trans people on the show who say this is doing horrendous things for trans people because it paints them all in a bad light.
But this is the thing, we're focusing on a minority of people. You know, this is a very... I'm not saying, you know, it doesn't happen, but the vast majority of trans people that I know aren't predators, aren't sexual deviants, aren't, you know, whatever, and just want to live their lives. So when we're focusing in on this, we are looking at a very, very small percentage. I'm not saying that it's not a problem, but I agree with you. It gives regular trans people, you know, everyday Joes, a bad reputation.
I think that's absolutely right.
I don't know if they're Joes.
Yeah.
Sorry?
I don't know if they're Joes.
No, they might not be
sorry
Joes.
I said that.
Offensive. But of course, I mean, and that is absolutely right. We are dealing with a very small minority, but at the same time, we're also dealing with a big majority. We're talking about women. Women are 50% of the population. We're talking about gay people as well who are being affected by this.
It's a safeguarding issue as much as these other things. And you have these kids, if they're being taught this stuff, oh, it's a woman, so I don't need to be as worried, or so. I don't know what. It's wrong.
Yeah,
it's wrong, and certainly when it's coming from our news sources.
Yeah. Okay. I've got into the habit now of just reading multiple news stories because I know that they won't all be accurate. Or you have to kind of balance it out. It's almost like a detective thing. Like, so I'll read something from the left and right, and be like, oh, is the truth somewhere in the middle?
You're now Jessica Fletcher.
I am Jessica Fletcher, which has always been my ambition.
Well, and I think you do it well.
Do I?
Yeah.
Well, when they remake Murder, She Wrote, I want to be there.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be Seth.
Wonderful.
Great.
Great. So after all that, call me Jessica. OK, fair enough. That's what we've got time for now. But a Green Party candidate, Melissa Poulton, has accused Conservative MP from Redditch, Rachel McLean, of making a transphobic comment. We're going to be talking about that after the break.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Speaking in the House of Commons this week, the UK Secretary of State for Women and Equalities, Kemi Badenoch, said the following.
We are seeing, I would say, almost an epidemic of young gay children being told that they are trans and being put on a medical pathway for irreversible decisions, and they are regretting it. That is what I'm doing for young LGBT children. I am making sure that young people do not find themselves sterilized because they are being exploited by people who do not understand what these issues are.
Strong words from Kemi Badenoch, but joining me now to discuss it is Dennis Kavanagh, director of the Gay Men's Network. Hi, and welcome to the show. It is very refreshing to hear a Member of Parliament stand up in the House of Commons and say this? Because the debate has been silenced on this for so long, hasn't it?
Well, that's right. As you probably know, Andrew, in 2015, when Stonewall adopted extreme gender identity ideology, they also adopted a tactic which they called no debate.
Yes.
And it's as simple as it sounds. It meant that they would present a series of extremist demands and absolutely not debate any policy, any proposition. And woe betide anyone who challenged them. They would be cancelled, they'd be called transphobic, they'd be called bigots. No debate died in the House of Commons on Wednesday of this week. And as I wrote this week, the last rites were administered by Kemi Badenoch. And thank goodness that it is gone, because behind no debate, the very constituency Stonewall was set up to serve and represent, gay people were being hurt by this. You and I have spoken before. We know that 80 to 90% of children, and remind people this is children we're talking about, at the Tavistock were same-sex attracted. 35% autistic, 70% presenting with 5 or so comorbidities. Deeply, deeply, deeply vulnerable people. The sort of people who were facing irreversible medical changes. And what are the gay rights charities doing? They're saying there should be no discussion about
So
this.
that's really interesting, because, you know, you saw in that clip the MP Chris Bryant on the other side of the House effectively sneering at what she's... Now, he's a gay man, and he's sort of saying that he believes that he's standing up for gay people. Stonewall would say that they are standing up for gay people. So what would you say to that? How is it that they are, in fact, damaging gay people?
Well, it's just ludicrous, because if you look at that exchange in Parliament, what happened was the Secretary of State for Women and Equality, Kemi Badenoch, made a series of very sensible points about what's going on in gender medicine. I want to emphasise this isn't party political. She herself said this isn't a left-right issue. She had exchanges with the heroic Neil Hanvey MP from the Alba Party and the brilliant Joanna Cherry KC MP from the Scottish National Party. I'm sure I've seen her have similar exchanges with Rosie Duffield from the Labour Party, and there are adult exchanges about paediatric medicine.
Yes.
Now, Sir Chris Bryant, sadly, stood up in the chamber about this serious area and simply said, which I found rather odd, simply said, well, what the Secretary of State said has made me feel less safe. That's extraordinary for a grown man to be saying that across the floor of the chamber. It's embarrassing to me to hear a gay man say it.
And how does he... I mean, he might feel less safe. We can't talk about his emotions, I suppose. But what about the gay people, gay young children who are being fast-tracked onto medication because they're not the norm?
Yeah, what a very good point. You want to talk about safety, Sir Chris Bryant. Let's talk about the safety of Keira Bell. Now, the Secretary of State spoke to Keira Bell. Keira Bell was a lesbian, a detransitioner, who was so badly hurt by gender medicine at the Tavistock, she mounted a remedy in judicial review in 2020. If we're going to talk about anyone's safety in this debate, let's talk about the safety of vulnerable young gay and lesbian children, vulnerable autistic children. Let's be honest what's going on here. This I feel unsafe is just a continuation of no debate. It's just a different way of saying, shut up, you should feel bad because you've made me, a gay man, upset. That is not an adult way to have a debate, and it's particularly inappropriate when we're talking about paediatric medicine. We're talking about the health of young gay people, young lesbians, and young people on the autistic spectrum.
Yes, but the problem is that a lot of gay people, like Chris Bryant, do seem to support these views and do seem to think that anyone who is raising concerns, such as yourself, is coming from a place of, well, what is it? Transphobia, hatred, bigotry, whatever. Why is it the case that so many within, well, shall I say it, our community seem to support incredibly anti-gay movements? What's going on there?
I ask myself this every day, because we're all looking at the same evidence, right?
Yeah.
I've read the interim Cass review, where Hilary Cass, quote, spoke to lesbians who reported pressure to trans-identify because they felt they were at the bottom of the heap.
Yeah.
We've read the Times article.
Yeah.
You know, there was a dark joke amongst Tavistock staff. Soon there will be no gay people left. We've read the case of Sonia Appleby, the safeguarding lead, who said the malign influence of mermaids was leading to children being fast-tracked to make irreversible medical decisions. So I don't think I really know the answer to your question, Andrew, because we're all looking at the same thing. It's almost like they're blinded by Stonewall briefing sheets, because I hear a continuation of no-debate tactics. They won't brook any criticism of what is increasingly being shown to be a global medical scandal.
But is this part of a broader problem in our culture, which is now all sorts of political differences and ideological differences seem to be interpreted as a matter of good versus evil? Stonewall has come down and has been, for whatever reason, perceived as being the goodies, and so everyone who opposes them is perceived as being the baddies. It's very simplistic, like a Disney view of the world where there are heroes and villains.
Yeah.
But actually, of course, if you're going to talk about goodies and baddies, I would say the people who don't want to medicalise gay kids are probably on the good side.
Well, I would be with you on that.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the right approach.
Are Stonewall dining out on their old reputation? Because they did do a lot of good for gay rights.
Yeah, absolutely. But, I mean, they're in freefall in terms of being taken seriously. The reality is that Stonewall achieved gay marriage primarily through discussion, primarily through having a debate.
Yes.
That all changed in 2015 with the adoption of extreme gender ideology and no debate. This is a different beast to what it was.
Yes, so what can we do about this? How can we raise awareness of it? Because a lot of people just don't believe it's happening. A lot of people haven't read the Cass review. A lot of people don't understand the implications on gay people, and they don't understand that when you promote gender identity ideology in this way, that we are actually taking gay rights backwards. They think it's a nonsense because they are so used to hearing about LGBT, that this is one whole thing, one happy family. So how do we change that narrative?
What we've got to do is change the discourse, and this week has been a powerful step forward in doing that. Kemi Badenoch said the sorts of things, and so did Neil Hanvey and Joe Cherry in the Chamber of the Commons, that would have got them banned from social media 3 years ago.
Yeah.
That came off the back of Neil Hanvey MP saying in Westminster Hall there are fears about transing the gay away. The next day there was a constructive and brilliant debate in the House of Lords led by Baroness Jenkin, in which I particularly noted one peer very movingly speaking about the plight of autistic children who, obviously I'm here for gay rights, autistic children are often forgotten in this as well.
Because they are disproportionately representing those who go to the Tavistock who have symptoms of gender dysphoria.
35%, Andrew, 35% of the patient cohort compared to 2% in the general population. So I think the answer to your question is we've got to keep spreading the word, and we've got to keep changing the discourse. And what happened in the Commons, Kemi Badenoch in particular saying the unsayable, but people across the House doing that.
Yes.
That changes the discourse. That gives people the power to speak about this and the strength to speak about it. And we should speak about this. These are deeply, deeply, deeply vulnerable children. 2018, Dr. David Bell reported instances of homophobic parents bringing children to the Tavistock to put them on puberty blockers to effectively trans away the gay. We have to have this conversation. Puberty is a human right, and it is a gay right to grow up free from surgery. And in 2023, being gay shouldn't be a medical problem.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me, Dennis Kavanagh. So next on Free Speech Nation, Spiked Online editor Tom Slater will be joining me to discuss the religious book-burning ban in Denmark. Don't go anywhere.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Following extensive deliberation, Denmark has introduced a law that criminalises the burning, soiling, trampling or cutting of recognised religious scriptures, such as the Quran, the Bible or the Torah. This legislative move comes in response to incidents where Qurans were burned and damaged during protests in Denmark and Sweden after months of intense debate. So joining me now to discuss this is the editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. Tom, welcome to the show. Is it not the case that Denmark is now just effectively reintroducing blasphemy law?
It is, and it's particularly tragic given the fact they only repealed their blasphemy law in like 2017.
Right.
So there's not been a very big window.
So you had a few years of freedom and then it's all gone.
Of course, it was one of those things where, you know, that old law hadn't been enforced for a very long time. This one definitely is going to be, because it is in response to, as you say, there has been this spate of Quran burnings which have been taking place not just in Denmark but also in Sweden. And as a consequence of that, they've been met with a furious response, terror threat level rising, and also essentially diplomatic dressing down from various Muslim-majority countries who have said in no uncertain terms you need to clamp down on these people. One thing that I thought was very telling was one of the spokespeople for the Moderate Party, which is part of the coalition in Denmark there, said that we are introducing this law not out of desire but out of necessity.
Well, they couched it as a safety measure.
And that says it all, I think.
They've said this is to do with we're putting Danish people at risk, at harm, either at home or abroad. Aren't they effectively saying that the Islamic world is uniquely combustible, and that, you know, isn't this quite patronising to Muslims?
It is, and I think it's also profoundly misguided insofar as there is this idea that censorship is the way that you tamp down on violence, it's the way that you avoid trouble. It's completely the opposite.
Yes.
If you suggest that if you menace a nation or a group of people for saying a particular thing that you happen to find offensive, or doing a particular thing that you happen to find blasphemous or sacrilegious, you're effectively inviting anyone to threaten violence or to inflict violence and expect a response, to expect a capitulation. So I think this could really backfire.
Well, if they're explicitly saying that they're worried about violent repercussions, doesn't that mean that terrorism works? Because they've just passed a law along those lines.
No, exactly. It works if you give in to it, and that's precisely what they're doing. And whilst I understand the pressure that they're under, you saw the Danish authorities talk about the terror threat level. And, of course, it wasn't that long ago, it was only a few weeks ago, that we saw that terror attack in Brussels, which is specifically targeted, according to the video by the Islamist extremists, Swedish football fans, because of the Quran burnings which have been going on in that country, seemingly as well. So it's not that the threat doesn't exist, it's just the fact that if you capitulate to it, first of all, you're not standing up for your own values and your own citizens and their rights. You're effectively allowing outsiders or domestic terrorists to dictate the freedoms of everyone else who lives in your society. But as I say, also, you're basically creating a kind of violent, intolerant veto, where if you menace someone, then they have to capitulate, and that's dreadful.
But the Danish government didn't make this mistake back in 2005, when there was the controversy over the cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, which were published in a Danish publication, Danish newspaper. There was a lot of pressure at the time to punish the publication, to censor that publication. There was a judicial review, but none of it worked. The government stood firm. So what's changed?
Well, I think that's one of the things that makes it so depressing, is the fact that you did have Denmark more or less kind of standing by Ilan's Poston and the journalists there, not capitulating, as you say, in terms of kind of ushering laws that would stop this from happening. There was, as we've seen similarly in the UK and the US, a kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth from a lot of the kind of political establishment or like other cultural figures who were nervous about it and actually said that they shouldn't have done it and so on. But nevertheless, more or less stood firm. Now we see what's happened. I think across the West, we've seen a kind of failure of nerve. And it's particularly depressing because really ever since 1989 and the Fatwa against Salman Rushdie, there's been this attempt to globalise Islamic blasphemy laws on the part of Islamic majority countries, in some cases, as also just Islamist terrorist organisations.
Yes.
And it's been depressingly successful. First of all, because there was this tendency just to internalise these rules, to not go there when it comes to criticising religion. So you almost didn't need a law. Now you've got Denmark actually putting it in black and white statute.
Yes.
And that is a tremendously depressing milestone that I think we have to reckon with.
Don't we sort of have it here? I mean, there was that 14-year-old boy in West Yorkshire who dropped a Quran on the floor by mistake, scuffed the pages, and the police were he was reported to the police, suspended from school. So don't we have those blasphemy laws here in one way or another anyway?
I think that's exactly right. I mean, that was a particularly chilling case because on the one hand, you just had, again, the school punishing him and the police being brought in because of concerns about a kind of backlash. But then he was actually given, this boy in question, who was an autistic teenager, right?
Yeah.
Didn't seem to really know he was doing anything with any malice, it seems like, if you listen to the testimonies. He was actually given a non-crime hate incident as a consequence of that. So what we're seeing,
by the police, yeah.
Exactly.
And he received death threats.
He received death threats, his mother received death threats. And that's the thing, this isn't just about these Scandinavian countries which have a particular specific problem with a spate of Quran burnings and protests as a consequence of that. This is a problem across the West.
So it's slightly complicated, isn't it? Because I personally am very uncomfortable with the image of books being burnt. I don't like it as a form of protest. I think it has connotations of the Third Reich. I think it just has the kind of unpleasant feeling about it that I just think there are better ways to protest than this. But that said, if I buy a book, it's my book and I should be able to do what I want with it, right?
I think that's exactly right. I mean, just because we believe in freedom doesn't mean we always agree with how people express themselves.
Yeah.
That being said, these Quran burnings, there is also context to them. There have been a lot of far-right agitators who have been doing it for reasons of just trying to gin up trouble and to engineer some sort of response from Muslims because they've got a kind of bigoted agenda against them. But there's other people, for instance, a Danish Iranian artist who has been doing this as a kind of art project, particularly to protest against the Iranian regime, which she herself escaped. So that's obviously fundamentally different. And I think, again, it comes down to context, of course, and it also comes down to just having the freedom to do it, which I think is fundamental, even if we don't always agree with how people exercise that right.
But again, we are living in this climate of intimidation now. I mean, everyone stood up after the horrible Charlie Hebdo massacre and said, je suis Charlie. That lasted about a minute, didn't it? Because people don't draw those sorts of cartoons anymore. You know, I think even Charlie Hebdo for a while stopped doing it. So the climate of fear is real. In this country, we had a film, The Lady of Heaven, a film made by a group of Muslim people, but they were the wrong aspect. They were Shia Muslims rather than Sunni Muslims. And that got shut down because there were mobs protesting. So we are living in that. Do we have to just accept the reality now that we don't really have freedom of speech when it comes to criticism and ridicule of this particular faith?
I definitely don't think we should accept it in the sense of, you know, allowing the state of affairs to continue for much longer. But you're exactly right in the fact that we've already arrived there. And I think it's so important that we realise that this isn't like a kind of neat, specific carve-out where freedom of speech is concerned. The struggle for freedom of speech was built on, in large part, the right to blaspheme, the right to mock gods and prophets. It's fundamental. It's not something which is just kind of a niche issue at the sidelines that we can just ignore and not really deal with. So I think if we give up that right, then we're essentially kind of selling the whole thing down the river.
But how do we do that when the threats are real? I mean, Samuel Paty, the school teacher in Paris, was beheaded on the street simply for showing the Charlie Hebdo cartoons in a lesson on free speech. The teacher at Batley Grammar School, I believe, is still in hiding after he showed those cartoons, again, in a lesson on free speech. I mean, it was relevant. It was part of the school curriculum, but the trade unions didn't defend that man. The head teacher didn't defend him, and he's having to go into hiding. None of us want that. So you can say to comedians, why aren't you mocking all of this stuff? But, you know, none of us want death threats and that kind of thing. So on a practical basis, how can we do anything about this?
On a practical basis, I think, first of all, it's not as if everyone has some sort of obligation to engage in this form of blasphemy. But those who do want to do it should be defended to the hilt. That should be in terms of physically, if necessary, in terms of security and so on, but also in public life, in discussion. I mean, the Batley Grammar School was such a perfect example, because when this teacher was menaced for showing those cartoons as part of a religious studies class on blasphemy, pretty relevant, you would think, the local MP essentially denounced him. The head teacher almost instantly capitulated, and everyone else just sort of stared at their shoelaces. So this is something which I think is really important that we do stand up for it.
Right.
Because at the moment, it's clear that the response is not a kind of robust defence of our liberal freedoms. It's been very thin on the ground in all of these instances.
And that is something we could all do. And I wonder whether we just didn't learn our lesson in the Salman Rushdie Satanic Verses affair, because at the time, one of our best writers being threatened with death by a foreign power, you would have thought we could all get behind that and say, actually, this is outrageous. You don't get to decide what this writer writes, that we would have supported Salman Rushdie. But we instead had endless debates about whether he brought it on himself.
Yeah.
And a lot of those were televised debates. Is it that we failed back then, and so we've missed our shot?
I think there's certainly some truth in that. I mean, people forget that even the Thatcher government at the time was very odd in their response to it. Obviously, they gave him police protection, which was nice of them, it's the least they could do. But also, they talked about how much they felt the hurt of the Muslim community, and they said that he's someone who's also offended British values, because he was quite a left-wing voice who had criticised a lot of elements of the British establishment. So I think from day one, we've failed to stick by these fundamental liberties, stick by the heretics and the blasphemers in question.
Yes.
But just because we haven't done it before doesn't mean we shouldn't start doing it now.
And a lot of Muslim people, I would say, the majority of Muslim people say that they are appalled by death threats and violence in response to even things they may find distasteful. So why do we insist on, basically capitulating to this minority of ultra-conservative reactionary types within that religious group?
I mean, I think it's a combination of things. There's certainly a huge amount of cowardice. I think one of the most chilling things that has happened in recent years is that people in politics or people in the media generally seem to think these people have a point when they say that you shouldn't be allowed to mock or criticise or depict certain religions or prophets or whatever. They seem to see it as almost kind of quasi-racist thing to do, which is absolutely bizarre. So in some respects, people have completely internalised the logic of the Ayatollah, as you might say it, but that's the more difficult thing to unwind. It's not just cowardice that's driving it.
No, it's not.
The sense that they've kind of got a point.
But we have a lot of... I mean, some Labour MPs have been pushing for more stringent laws against Islamophobia. But I'm not even sure what they mean by that. Do you think they know?
I don't think they do. I mean, Islamophobia is a complete nonsense. I mean, it's an idea that was cooked up by Islamists and very well propounded and taken up by a lot of idiots in kind of Western liberal elite circles. It's basically a demand that you cannot criticise a particular religion.
Right.
We all recognise kind of anti-Muslim bigotry when you see it, when someone is, having broadsides against making generalisations, demonising people on the basis of their faith or whatever. But that's not what Islamophobia is about. It's trying to chill, demonise and ultimately silence criticism of a religion, which, as I say, is what freedom of speech historically was built on.
Exactly. I mean, wouldn't it be less Islamophobic to treat our Muslim co-citizens as equals to ourselves, and to say that in a secular society we all get to be criticised and we all get to be ridiculed, and we're not going to treat you any differently, we're not going to patronise you in this way? Wouldn't that be the more progressive approach?
I completely agree, but a lot of the so-called progressives don't seem to see it that way. But it's exactly right. We're essentially treating our British Muslim fellow citizens as essentially kind of overgrown violent children. And we are also taking the extremist violent fringe and suggesting that they are essentially the authentic voice of British Muslims who we have to listen to and capitulate to. It completely throws liberal Muslims under the bus. It completely throws smaller Muslim sects under the bus. I mean, if you think about the only individual over the last 10 or 15 years who's actually been killed in this country as a result of blasphemy, it was an Ahmadi Muslim who lived in Glasgow, because of the fact that the Ahmadis, by certain other sections of the Muslim population, are considered to be heretics and instead considered to be blasphemers. So when you allow these kind of blasphemy restrictions or this general intolerance against so-called blasphemers to take hold in your society, it's also a really big threat to the minorities within Islam, which is why I think we should take no truck with this idea that these extremists speak for all Muslims in this country or anywhere else.
Tom Slater, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you.
And next up on Free Speech Nation, can Nigel Farage win I'm a Celebrity? Plus social sensations and your unfiltered dilemmas. Do not go anywhere.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. It's time for Social Sensations. This is part of the show where we look at what's been going viral this week on social media. First up, we've got this video.
I think Nigel's an amazing person until he speaks about what he really believes in, and it's like, oh, no, but you're a cool guy, but why'd you think like that? Like, just,
So that was former contestant Nella Rose, and despite many not agreeing with his views, Nigel has come across well on the show. He's made it into the final 3 alongside Tony Bellew and Sam Thompson. 9 others have been voted out before him, including the popular This Morning presenter Josie Gibson, First Dates host Fred, and JLS star Marvin Humes. I don't know who any of those people are. But I tell you what, he's doing very well. I mean, it looks like Nella Rose, that she was giving him the benefit of the doubt there. Because I thought they were having rows, weren't they, before?
No, they had like one disagreement or something like that. That was
and then they got on after that.
The only noticeable moment in the whole series. It's been a dud, this series. The viewership has been down a couple of million.
Oh, really?
But I think some people are trying to blame Farage on it, and it's because I think in a way, he is to blame. It seems like they probably spent all the money on him and then didn't get anybody else decent in it.
Oh. You know. OK, well, look, let's hear from Nigel right now.
I've been stuck in here a long time. I've got this far. Help me become king of the jungle. Now, the easiest way to do it is to get the I'm a Celebrity app. That gives you 5 free votes. Or you can phone or text. Vote for me.
There was a good joke they cut out there, which was vote to remain.
That was a good joke. Thanks, Josh. Well, look, if you want to register to vote for Farage, you'll need to grab your phone, scan the QR code on the screen and download the app. And by the way, as he just said, you can vote for him 5 times a day. Seems a bit much. Are you a fan of this show, Bruce?
No, no, it's really not for me. I don't like anything to do with dirt. Well, not that kind of dirt, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And also, as well, I was so disappointed last year because I'm a big Boy George fan. I know it's a huge surprise. And he's like Sam Thompson. He can no longer speak because of the size of the veneers. So I just find that very depressing.
Yeah, that is upsetting.
Although I do like Made in Chelsea. Me and my niece enjoy that.
Oh, you're a man of many contradictions,
And
Bruce.
I have done warm-up for Marvin and Rochelle for the hit list.
Oh, well, I apologise for
We
saying
don't have
I
an
didn't know.
audience now. COVID.
So next up, we have got this video. Let's have a look.
Without a shadow of a doubt, it is a transphobic comment. It's dog whistling at the finest, you know. It's gaslighting. It's everything. By attacking a minority group, it's just, yeah, you know, it's a shame.
OK, so that's Green Party candidate Melissa Poulton, who accused Conservative MP for Redditch Rachel McLean of being transphobic on the BBC this morning. Now, Rachel was due to appear on this programme, but informed us a short while ago that she was unable to attend. I'm hoping that we can speak to her next week. Her crime, I believe, is she referred to Melissa Poulton as a man in a wig. I think from what... And she... Oh, no, sorry. She liked a post that said that this was a man in the wig. That is a man in a wig. So I don't think that's really fair, is it?
I really hope that is a man in a wig. For her sake.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I find it very odd to accuse this woman of transphobia. It seems very, very unfair, I think. You know?
I think both could stand getting some layers in their hair.
Yes. That's fair. That's... Always Bruce with the aesthetic judgment. But we should say we did try and get a comment from the Green Party, but haven't had one yet. Hopefully, we'll have Rachel on next week and a response from the Greens as well, because we want to hear all sides of this. And Melissa Poulton, if you're watching and you'd like to be on the show too, that would be wonderful, and I sincerely mean that. So finally, we've got this video from Tesco.
Well, yeah, it is. If I pay for my items at the tilling, you're chasing me down trying to tell me that I haven't paid for certain things. I've paid for everything on here. Yeah, I did a scan as your shop.
Literally just been asked to come and just check that that's paid for.
Check, see, who's paid for? I've just paid for my items.
Just called...
Off my phone. Who are you grabbing my stuff out of my hand? No, you cannot take my property out of my hand.
Right, Tesco looks exciting. I'm going to stop going to Waitrose. That's amazing. What is going on there, Bruce?
Well, I think the thing is, I had a similar thing with Zara, that I'd bought these boots, these very boots that I'm wearing this evening. I bought them in Edinburgh. They hadn't deactivated the alarm, and when I went into the one in Victoria, the security guard ran up to me and went, "What have you stolen?" I went, "I've just come from the street. A paving stone. What do you think I've stolen, you twit?" And had to go over and get them deactivated.
Well, that's your excuse, Bruce.
That woman... I was able to show my card receipt, but that woman should never have grabbed the phone.
No.
And they should stop scanning your shop. Friends of mine were targeted in a Surbiton Sainsbury's for similar. "Oh, you've just put something in your bag." Yeah, I know. But I'm doing scan and shop.
But why the violent confrontation?
No,
Why can't we...
that was totally wrong. But it's also wrong that you're having to do the work yourself, and then you get through it, and then they're going, "Now we're going to double check everything," and they're chasing after it. And no one's mentioned the fact that they're emptying the stuff out, and you put the light items on top, and then they've got the Coke, the big thing of Coke, and they're putting that on the muffins. This is wrong. They've destroyed her food and her clever system.
Right. Well, I think we've got time for... Josh get very upset about this. Very upset. Look, I'm afraid we don't have time for the unfiltered dilemmas because Josh got so much on his high horse. But we'll solve your problems next week, don't worry. But thanks for joining us for Free Speech Nation. If you want to join us in the audience, by the way, you can easily do that. Just go to www.sroaudiences.com and you can come along and join us in this live studio audience. We have food, we have drinks.
Twiglets.
Twiglets. We have lots and lots of twiglets. Thank you ever so much to all of my guests and, of course, to Bruce Devlin and Josh Howie, who have been absolutely wonderful. Tonight you saw Tiffany Jenkins, Kate Coleman, David Oldroyd-Bolt, Dennis Kavanagh and Tom Slater. We're going to have a huge raft of wonderful guests next week. Stay tuned because Mark Dolan tonight is on next. And don't forget, Headliners is on every night at 11 o'clock. That's the late night paper preview show where comedians talk you through the next day's top news stories. Do not miss that. Thank you ever so much for joining us for Free Speech Nation. See you again next week.
Warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers.
sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. Unsettled weather continues as low pressure remains very much in charge of our weather over the next couple of days. Storm Fergus, situated out to the west, slowly moves its way towards us through Sunday evening and into the start of Monday, bringing with it some very heavy rainfall, particularly to northern parts of England, where the ground is already very saturated, so we could see some localised flooding through the early hours of Monday morning. Some strong winds too, particularly across western Wales and through the Bristol Channel, where we could see gusts up to 60 miles an hour. Temperatures in the south generally around 7 or 8 degrees, but a much colder night across northern parts of Scotland, where we could see some icy conditions, particularly across the southwest of Scotland through Monday morning. A cloudy start across the northern half of the UK on Monday, some showers continuing along those eastern coasts of Scotland, but generally